Welcome to the Hashimoto's Doctor Podcast. You're now part of a growing community of people determined to take their health back through education and self-empowerment. But because of the healthcare system today, we don't have access to the types of healthcare that we want. So we have to do things differently. We've got to do things smarter, and we do that by becoming our own advocates. This podcast will give you the perspective and thoughts of one of the world's leading Hashimoto's doctors. So let's get started. Hey guys, Dr. Shook here. I hope you're doing well today. In today's podcast, what I want to talk to you guys about is a very important topic that does not get enough attention and that not many people are aware of. And this is really this connection between Hashimoto's and ADHD in women and girls. This is really important because ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, usually when people think of that, they think of kids running around screaming and making noise or not being able to focus. And very frequently they think of boys doing that because that's the classic, the poster child for that diagnosis. And the reality is that we know that this is a big problem for girls, and this is something that is very commonly missed and overlooked because of that preconceived idea and notion that it's really not a problem that affects girls. But what we know is there are several things here that are really important to understand. There are studies that show that women with Hashimoto's are at a higher risk of giving birth to a child with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. So if you're listening to me, many of you have Hashimoto's because you know that that's something we talk a lot about. It's something I'm really passionate about. And the research is showing that there's a correlation to higher birth rates of children that have this diagnosis. And we're not exactly sure why, but we know that there are numerous physiological processes and problems that occur with Hashimoto's, being an autoimmune condition that affects numerous different biochemical processes in the body, and somehow that's manifesting in our children. And one of the things I've been immersed in the study of genomics lately, and really looking at what I think is the future of the way that we take care of ourselves, and that is through precision medicine, which is basically it takes everything a step further. Even like natural healing approaches that are more popular today, it takes a step further because it looks at your genes, and then it looks at your environment and how the environment is contributing to the expression of those genes. And that is really the ultimate, in our current understanding, the ultimate way to look at you from the most unique perspective. Because it's why so many people fail with generalized diets, even what are considered to be the best types of diets today and approaches. It's because it's not unique to them. It's not tailored to them. And we know that. So my point there is that these things that happen in utero to your child while you're carrying them is something that can and does affect the genetic expression of your offspring. And they know we've seen that in animal studies this is very reproducible. The agouti mouse study and numerous studies to date where they've influenced just like what the mothers eat, like the mice eat. And I know that doesn't translate perfectly to humans, but we can see this in other animal models. And we know that it's important that we look at these things and that we're aware of the environmental effects and impact on our genetic expression. So there's something going on here with mothers and their offspring, our children. So there's a higher rate of ADHD. But the reason this is so important in women and girls is because this is a population of people, women, or an entire sex that is considered, doctors don't typically think of as having ADHD. Usually not. Now you might say, well, my daughter or I definitely have it, and you might have, that's great if you've identified those potential problems. There's a lot of things that need to be done about it, which we'll talk about in a second, but so many people, guys, and so many doctors do not consider this. And, usually this ADHD, how does it manifest? It shows as what? It shows up as disorganization typically and inattentiveness. And I know because, listen, guys, I am probably, I could have been, I could have been a poster child for ADHD. When I was younger, when I was in, when I think I was as soon as like first or second grade, I was, the teachers told my mom that, I needed like specialized learning classes. And that's the last thing that you want to do as a child, is to be, and as a parent, to also hear that your child needs special tutoring, that and they used to call it, I don't know, it was lots of different terminology was used, and they probably use different terminology now, but basically it meant that I had to go to special classes for different subjects. And what it came down to was this, inability to focus, disorganization, and they kept that. I recall the teachers kept telling my mom, they kept saying, and here's the thing, guys, I bet you that my mother has, if we checked her, I would bet that she probably has an autoimmune thyroid condition. It's something that I need to do. I need to just, pay for her to do it, or, order the lab work for her and say, here, go to the lab, because I'm so curious to know. But my mother has severe psoriasis, guys, like plaque psoriasis. This is not the stuff that you see, these little pieces of psoriasis. No, these are huge spots all over the body. And this is something that, I've tried to work with her on. But it's difficult to do with some people because they're not in the same place that all of us are. And it's so anyway, I'm not making excuses for her. But, the fact is that she's autoimmune. So she carried me, right? And so just like we're talking about in this podcast, mothers giving birth to children with higher rates of ADHD that have Hashimoto's, I wonder if her autoimmunity in general may not have been one of the things that contributed to my ADHD, they wanted to call it like learning disability. That's what they wanted to call it back in the day. And they don't call that now. They're more, they try to be more neutral as to that label, because that can be very damaging. Like, I remember feeling such shame with that, because that came up sometime. I'd learned that from second grade until, I don't know, I was probably labeled with that until seventh grade, second to seventh grade. And they said, hey, you don't really fall into this category. You can choose to not have this special care in classes if you don't want it. And of course I was like, no, I don't want to be called, I don't want to be labeled with a learning disability. They always told my mom, they said, they said, Brad has a very high IQ, but he doesn't apply himself. That's what I was told. And then my mom always thought it was just this voluntary thing that I did. And the whole time I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I just hate English. I hated the class. I hated the structure. I didn't learn in that environment. But it wasn't the environment. Guys, I really think that this was something that was a genetic and epigenetic expression due to probably my mom's problems that she had and that she has while she was carrying me, and then also probably my environmental factors at the time. Because remember, I was growing up in the late 70s, early 80s. I was exposed to all this low fat, high carb garbage with artificial sweeteners and all the stuff that many of you were exposed to, right? Many of you were exposed to that. Either maybe you're older, maybe you're younger than me, but you probably caught the tail end of it, or you lived through it at a very, critical points in your time where you were indoctrinated into this low fat lifestyle, and there was all this artificial sweetener, low fat everything, and it was, carbs were considered great, and then everyone blows up and they're obese. Well, I was living, this was the time of my life when I was going through this, was during the 80s, and I was exposed to all of this garbage. I remember eating, food coloring and sugar and these, snack wells, treats. I don't know if any of you guys remember those, but all these things that I know very, very likely contributed to a very, very poor expression of my genes and of my would have been, listen, it would not be the approach I would recommend today, and it's not what I recommend if you have ADHD. It's not what you would do. So anyway, this was a lot of this was probably this epigenetic, which means above the DNA, environmental expression. It's what happened, guys. My environment and my DNA, the way that I was, the factors and the things that turn genes on and off in in utero when my mother was carrying me. All these things contributed to this, and so I just want you guys to know that it's really important, because this disorganization or inattentiveness is the typical hallmarks and most characteristic symptoms that they're going to see with ADHD, or a labeling you with that. But I am telling you now that this is usually with boys, as it was with me, and that you've got to look very, very closely at the environmental factors that are leading into this, and that are factoring into this. I'm going to talk about those in just a second, I promise. I didn't mean to digress on my own story, but I think it's really important that you understand that even with those labels, it doesn't mean your children aren't smart, they're not intelligent. It just means, what it really means to me is, it means that we have to look very, very closely at their inflammatory levels, at their diet. We have to look at their gut function, which are critical, because you guys remember, if you've listened to my story, where do I usually start my story with you guys? I should probably start it back there and tell you those factors that played into me becoming who I am, and those were probably the first signs and symptoms of a problem with me, and my health was even at very, very young age, like first or second grade. But the most important thing here is really, if you've listened to my story, as I've shared with you guys before, I usually tell you guys about how I had such terrible digestive function, right? You remember that? My gut was horrible. I had terrible digestive function, which would probably be called, today it would probably be called IBS with constipation, IBS-C. Because I know that there was at least one time that I went 10 days without a bowel movement, guys, when I was probably 12. And I think I was in 7th grade. At that time, I think I was in 7th grade. And I remember I had football practice, and I was absolutely miserable. And I think that, probably the diet and a lot of the things that were leading and contributing to my ADHD at 6 years of age, 7 years of age, 8, 9, 10, those all were probably dietary things, and those were signals that there was a problem going on. And then it manifested and it started changing. My body was breaking down. I was young. I had some things going for me, obviously, that helped my body to regenerate, the hormones and everything that were changing in my youth. And then I guess, probably 12, puberty hits, hormones change, things start to really, really go downhill for me there. And even further. But I want you guys to know that that's kind of my path. This is really, really important to me that we share this message, because of my own struggles with this, which I just look back at it and I was like, if someone if this information would have just been available, then what difference in my life could that have made? And I mean, I'm not saying, I have the worst life, but man, I struggled, and I had a lot of shame and loss of confidence and loss of a lot of opportunities because of this stuff that I've struggled with, guys. And, I know that you have too. I know, and I don't want your children to go through this. And I want you to be able to take your health back. And I don't want your daughters and you to struggle with, or, your sons as well. But this is something that's just so commonly missed. And I don't want you to go through it. So, the crazy thing about this is that the diagnosis of ADHD, we know that, like, a lot of the things that come with this, like I just said to you guys, is this, this shame and fear, and it's those things can really lead to some very unhealthy behaviors in our children. I mean, feelings of shame and fear is something that can increase. We know that it increases our children, and it increases the risk of them doing self-harm. Like, it literally increases suicide risk. And this is not acceptable. We got to do a better job. I mean, it's really, really important, and it's something that we don't want to miss in our children. But the thing is that, the diagnosis of ADHD in girls has increased 55% in the last 10 years or so, and that's compared to 40% in boys. And it's just something that we really, really, really have to be acutely aware of, because there's a lot of stuff that we can do to help it. And that the thing is that, like I said, in our girls, these feelings of being unfocused and disorganized, it can lead to depression and anxieties. And you guys know all too well, right? You go to your doctor and you have these symptoms, and instead of being a thyroid problem being uncovered, it ends up being that you get a recommendation for like an antidepressant or something. And you guys know how frustrating that can be. And the thing is it's the same kind of thing. Like if we use the example of you go to your doctor and they give you a recommendation for an antidepressant when you really needed a thyroid replacement, or you needed a better understanding of some of the functional breakdowns of the thyroid physiology, and so that you could work on other driving processes causing you to have those symptoms of low thyroid function. But instead you get recommended an antidepressant. And granted, that's very frustrating because you don't feel well and the antidepressant is not addressing the underlying mechanisms causing your symptoms. That same kind of scenario where you have symptoms and you get recommended a medication to try and help you, the doctors mean very, very well. And you know what? That medication indeed may be beneficial, and that's completely in their wheelhouse. They'll determine that with you. But the fact is what's the underlying mechanism driving this? And the thing is that if your children go into the doctor with this disorganization and these signs of this ADHD, if they give them medications of ADHD, that may actually, in the long run, that could create some problems. And so you've got to make sure that you're looking at the driving factors. Now, you have to talk to your doctor about what's right for your medications. If you take them or not. That's not at all something that I address. I work with your doctors to try and make sure that we put together as complete and as comprehensive of an approach as possible. But we do not, recommend or make any recommendations on medications for you. But the thing is that we know is that a lot of these medications could actually exacerbate the symptoms of ADHD. I think one of the most alarming things that we see today is that the number one, the fastest and the fastest growing group of people that are actually being prescribed these ADHD medications are, guess what, guys? Adult women. That's right, adult women. So when we see these symptoms and these problems, what we have to do is we have to ask ourselves, why are we manifesting, or why are we showing these symptoms? What is occurring? What is happening that is driving this change in the physiology that's causing this disorganization, this inattentiveness, this inability to focus and concentrate? So when you start looking at this, guys, when we start looking at this from a precision medicine perspective and looking at genetics, we want to start looking at a lot of the lifestyle and environmental factors that affect this. And the most common things that we have to look at is, are there inflammatory loads that are present? So is there a higher level of inflammation? Are there problems with diet in general? Is there an autoimmune condition that may be going on and underlying? And we know that it's going to be more common to see autoimmunity in people with ADHD and ADHD in people with autoimmunity, because they lead to problems with neuron or nerve cell firing and processing. So, and that's due to one of the most common things is the inflammatory component there. So that's one of the things that you really need to be aware of, guys, is you've got to look at the driving factors. And if you need help with that, you can reach out to us and we will do our very best to either give you guidance on different types of approaches you could take. You guys could always look into our transformation program, which gives you good generalized framework of how to approach a lot of these problems and really help yourself. Or if you want to get the fastest results possible, then you may want to consider working one-on-one with me as in a consulting manner and allowing us to help you get testing and investigate root driving factors of this, from a more quantitative perspective by getting testing done and putting together a very precise plan for you to best help you or your children deal with some of these problems that are occurring. So what I really want to do is just discuss this with you guys. It's something that hits so close to home for me because of my personal experiences that, sometimes it takes me a long time to reflect back and see some of the connections to the things that have occurred throughout my life or that have happened to me, and then, relate and share those with you guys. It's not always something that's obvious on the surface. But the more that I learn, the more I can reflect upon my own experiences and just, see these connections that I never had contemplated in the past. And there are stories and there are lessons that help me to better understand how to help you. So that's why I always want to share these stories and these connections with you guys. But anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I hope this has helped to add value to your life and give you some better insight here. But I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I look forward to hanging out and talking to you guys again soon. Thanks. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out behind the scenes with Dr. Shook. You can also talk with and learn from Dr. Shook through Facebook Live on our Facebook page at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. Don't forget, you can also get access to our videos, guidebooks, and thyroid programs at www.drbradshook.com. Oh yeah, and don't forget one more thing. We can change the world one person, one family, and one community at a time. Until next time, remember, today is your day, and no one will tell you who you are and what you can be.